Morning everyone. My name's Marie. If I muck up with the IT, I apologise. It's certainly not my strength, but we'll work through it. I'd like to firstly start by acknowledging and paying my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, whose country we're meeting on today. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and the community members at VALS that we get to work alongside. I also acknowledge that we are on Aboriginal land across Australia and that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Particularly meeting today, I'd also like to acknowledge the community members across the sector that we've lost, in lives lost to AOD struggles and the trauma that that's further inflicted. I won't do the intro because it was done, but I will say thank you so much for having me speak at the Providers Conference today. And I've already mucked up. Okay, so just a bit of a content warning before we start. I'll be yarning a little bit about issues that include references to Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that have passed on. And there will be discussions of self-harm, trauma, violence, abuse and racism. Good. Alrighty. So VALS was founded because of the discrimination of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people experience every day in the legal system. The legal system we have in Australia was established by the British when they invaded and colonised this land. It was designed to destroy the oldest continuous culture on the earth and continues to pursue this goal. The criminalisation of drug and alcohol use is an example of this harmful colonial policy. We see the devastating effects this has on our community every day at VALS. The criminalisation of what is a public health issue pushes our people into police interactions and carceral systems, where police are treated roughly, handcuffed, strip searched, subjected to shame and stigma. It pushes people into prison cells, where people experience unsupported drug withdrawal, solitary confinement, more routine strip searches, self-harm and other harmful prison practices, all the while being separated from culture and supports. I think as a quick interim across the state, VALS has been strongly advocating for Pockham's Law across the last few years. This is in reference to bail transformation that we've seen in Victoria. I think if you're working in the AOD sector, you probably are aware of it, but certainly at VALS, it's something that we're very strongly advocating against. We are seeing, in one of the programs I manage, we are seeing Aboriginal people in police cell custody for up to an excessive of 21 days. So this means that they are not having contact with family and support systems, access to legal services, nutritional food, and really limited health and mental health and AOD supports. Every day I read emails coming through of the notifications where we've got mob withdrawing in cells with very little medical or support intervention. I know VALS and VACCHO, which is the peak health organisation in Victoria, are really strongly advocating against this and really strongly supporting more health supports while mob are in police cells. Back to my notes. People suffering from the effects of trauma are traumatised even more in prisons, while the underlying causes behind drug and alcohol use remain unaddressed. And then people come out of prison with even more barriers to treatment and even more triggers for AOD use than previously. As you know, this impacts everything: people's ability to get jobs, housing, sustain housing, keep our family, reintegrate with family, and stop children being removed and taken into care. Criminalisation causes vicious cycles to continue. But our people are strong. We have lived on this land for 60,000 years and in excess. When given the chance, we use our strength to reshape the legal system. In 2023, we saw a good example of how Aboriginal people can make can make the systems we live in better for everyone. When after years of advocacy, public drunkenness was decriminalised and replaced with a public health response led by our ACCHOs, namely VACCHO and VALS. I'll speak more to this example later, but the success of our ACCHOs and ACCHOs. So for those that don't know, I know we try to break down lingo, but ACCHO is Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, whereas an ACCHO, for example, VALS, is an Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation. So I will speak to this example more, but the success of our ACCHOs in delivering culturally appropriate public intoxication outreach and health services, and the safety and support that they have provided our people during their moments of need has been an incredible success story. This is one of the many reasons why VALS has been advocating for the decriminalisation of drugs and a shift to a public health approach for personal drug use. It shows us the true power of self-determination and system transformation, which will be explored more through treaty negotiations in the coming years. For those that may not know, treaty, so we've just recently in Victoria had the Walk for Truth from Gunditjmara country, which is Portland, to the steps of Parliament House. I think it might have been Wednesday, from Gunditjmara man Travis Lovett, who's also a Europe Commissioner. If you don't know anything about it, I'd strongly suggest you have a little bit of a Google because it was amazing. But also the treaty, I think treaty is being currently negotiated and hopefully will go into Parliament around September this year. So that's incredibly exciting. Alrighty, so criminalisation of drugs. So before we turn to the decriminalisation of drugs, I'd like to talk briefly about what the criminalisation of drugs looks like and how it affects Aboriginal communities. Available statistics tell us that drug use is broadly increasing for non-Aboriginal people. However, in contrast, among Aboriginal people, drug use is stable and even decreasing for some types of drugs. Despite this, Aboriginal people are increasingly charged with drug use more than non-Aboriginal people. In Victoria, the charging of Aboriginal people with drug use and possession offences has increased 128% from 2013 to 2022. This compares to an increase of just 17% for non-Aboriginal people for that same time frame. When anything is criminalised, we must acknowledge the impact of racial profiling and systemic discrimination on how our people are policed and surveilled. Again, a little bit of a detour. Sorry, I'm shocking at this, and timekeeper, I apologise. VALS, we did a really great Invasion Day webinar in January, and we had a just phenomenally powerful panel. And in particular, we had one young fella, I think Jai Binge, who via this webinar spoke about already being police profiled from the age of 8, from where he was growing up. So again, something else if you've got downtime to have a look at. Alrighty. So at the recent Victorian parliamentary inquiry into personal cannabis use, which considered whether to decriminalise cannabis use for adults, VALS provided evidence about what criminalising cannabis was doing for our communities. We know that Aboriginal communities have been subjected to discriminatory and violent policing since colonisation, and this remains persistent today. Aboriginal people are disproportionately stopped, searched, arrested, charged and imprisoned. Data released last year showed that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are 11 times more likely to be searched by Victoria Police than non-Aboriginal people. Any arrest or police interaction is inherently harmful, even if it later results in a caution, diversion or charges being dropped. It can be very traumatising and creates a sense of mistrust and or fear with police and other authorities. Again, a little tidbit. So I have a little 5-year-old. When she was 4, she went to kinder last year. She went to an Aboriginal kindergarten, so we were very blessed in where we live that we have access to such strong cultural early years education. There was another little girl who we know quite well, already through over-policing of her family. She was in out-of-home care, and I think they had like a kinder day where the police came in and, you know, kind of quite normal, and she was very staunch in F the police at 4 years old. So, whereas my little one was like, I want to be a police. No, you don't. No, you don't. So I think, you know, it's a cute little tidbit, but if you think about what that little one, her experience, you know, while she did get to live with her parents for a little bit, what that kind of looked like in terms of such a visceral response to a police uniform in a really culturally safe environment. So, you know, just kind of unpacking that a little bit spoke volumes for me. Sorry, I will get back on topic. Okay. All right. Inadequate training and improper conduct from police can also lead to these interactions escalating to become more hostile. This can result in further and more serious charges, such as resisting arrest or assaulting police, which would never have occurred if there was no original police interactions. This further puts our mob at risk of dying in custody. In that same email thread that I talked about, where I see when our mob are coming into police custody, very frequently there are reports of broken arms, injuries to their body, which have been sustained through arrest. So I had a meeting with, we have a police and prison accountability team at VALS. And the escalation of police harm and brutality, as well as the lack of medical and health supports and reports that are going through that team, is just to an extent where they're actually we're not funding to be able to respond in the way that we would like. So we're looking at trying to outsource some of that, but I suppose I say that just to give a bit of an insight of how much these levels are rising post-bail change. Or even, when it was announced, because the next day we saw very strict magistrates, I suppose. All right, one of the most common offences leading to this over-policing is a personal possession of cannabis, or yandi as we call it in our community. Aboriginal people are far more likely to be charged with drug offences arising from personal use and possession than non-Indigenous people. This is despite the rates of use being similar across the board. Data shows that in 2021 to 2022, Aboriginal people were 8 times more likely to be arrested for possession of cannabis than non-Aboriginal counterparts. In contrast, non-Aboriginal people arrested for the possession of cannabis were 50% more likely to receive a caution in Victoria. The former police commissioner apologised for this sort of racist policing at the Yurok Commission last year, but we are still waiting for his words to translate into action. But what emerges from this data is abundantly clear. Victoria's current carceral approach to personal cannabis use increases Aboriginal people's contact with the criminal legal system, and this entrenches cycles of disadvantage and reinforces all of the harms of discriminatory policing. It puts Aboriginal people who need supports in handcuffs, police cells and prison, re-traumatising them, denying them proper health care and increasing the risk of more deaths in custody. The inquiry recommended decriminalising the cultivation and possession of small quantities of cannabis for personal use, similar to what is in the ACT. It also made other recommendations, including introducing a scheme to expunge prior cannabis-related convictions. An inquiry into the use of cannabis in Victoria in 2019 found that criminalisation of cannabis use in Victoria was harmful, particularly for Aboriginal people. Despite the findings and clear body of evidence which supported decriminalisation, the government has failed to act. In the meantime, increased interactions with police and the criminal legal system continues to maintain the existing unacceptable incarceration rate of Aboriginal people in Victoria and continues to deliver no benefit to individuals or the public. We must also acknowledge that the wider harmful effects of criminalisation. Aboriginal people are more likely to have a criminal record than non-Aboriginal people. The overrepresentation in convictions for personal drug use is a big contributor to this. A criminal record has major disruptive effect on a person's life, including blocking access to housing, employment and other services, entrenching marginalisation. I think for this bit it's really important to think about, particularly in our community, we know that children being removed, we have significantly higher rates, but having a criminal record often means that that person then can't be a kinship carer for any children in that broader family. Criminalising children and young people for cannabis use does nothing to prevent drug use and only serves to stigmatise children, institutionalise them, increase social isolation and deter them from seeking meaningful support. For Aboriginal children and young people, continuing to criminalise cannabis subjects them to discriminatory policing and higher rates of prosecution than non-Aboriginal counterparts. Having a criminal record for using or possessing cannabis as a young person will only increase more barriers to being able to work or find housing, volunteer or travel. Prison harm. All right, criminalisation of drugs extends and exacerbates the harmful effect of a prison environment. As we know, many people who enter prisons in Victoria on drugs or other charges are often withdrawing from drugs, dealing with an addiction, or may use drugs as a coping mechanism for past traumas. I think that's pretty well known that, particularly in our community, drugs or AOD is a massive masking, self-medicating. The inadequate support for people withdrawing from drugs has been identified by the Victorian Ombudsman as a factor in high rates of force being used against people in prison, and a report on the use of force in the Metropolitan Remand Centre, or MRC, and Melbourne Assessment Prison MAP. I don't think we're there yet. The effects of inadequate support for people withdrawing are extremely serious. Evidence regarding the adequacy of medical care for withdrawal provided to Veronica Nelson. So it was Veronica Nelson that triggered the Pockham's Law advocacy that VALS is so staunch with. During the inquest, the coroner was also examined the impact of stigma and discrimination on Veronica's death, including stigma she may have experienced as a drug user. Along with the grossly inadequate healthcare and support Veronica received in the lead up to her passing, the coroner also found that failure to provide treatment was negatively influenced by drug stigma, and that drug stigma casually contributed to Veronica's passing. People who find themselves in these circumstances need support which do not attach blame or stigma to the use of drugs, and prison environments cannot provide such support as long as drug use in the community remains criminalised. As a result, people who use drugs are even more likely to suffer serious harms to their mental health and well-being when they are incarcerated. There is a total lack of culturally safe and effective drug alcohol treatment programs in prison. Heather Calgarrett, who is another Aboriginal woman that's passed at Dame Phyllis, after she was given a dose of bupe as a part of the opioid treatment program there, despite not having a proven history of opioid use before she entered prison. The court has heard evidence that many women are started on opioid substitution treatment preemptively because of the perceived risk of illicit opioid use when they leave prison. but as expressed by one of the women who gave evidence at the inquest, the way that opioid substitution treatment is done in prison can lead to opioid dependence and not prevent it. VALS firmly believes that rehabilitation programs should operate on a voluntary principles. Attempts to rehabilitate people are unlikely to be successful when they are premised upon a carceral logic that threatens people with punishment. I have just been given the 1 minute, so give me 2 seconds and I might just flick through. Apologies. Sorry. All right. So an ACCHO-led health response. So because of the Day's family's tireless advocacy, our ACCHOs are now funded to provide support for people who are intoxicated in public. This can involve outreach workers, assisting people to get home safely, have a safe space to sleep at night that's culturally appropriate. So we have also sobering centres and places of safety. People getting linked into more holistic health services if that's what they choose. In case people are interested, I won't provide one now because I'm running out of time, but happy to send out some info if you contact, I think, VALS. So we've got Nguala Willambong, Rumbalara in Shepparton, Bendigo and District Aboriginal Cooperation, obviously in Bendigo, Watherong in Geelong, and Ballarat District Aboriginal Cooperation in Ballarat. So CoHealth are also providing a mainstream sobering centre and health services in Collingwood. All right, so as the success of our ACCHOs shows, we sorely need ACCHOs delivering AOD services and wellbeing to mob in prison. The importance of equivalence of care of Aboriginal people in prison was recognised by the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody more than 30 years ago. It is clear that the failure to provide adequate healthcare, including AOD and wellbeing services that is equivalent to what is available in the community, inflicts more harm on incarcerated people who use drugs. The Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, in recommending equivalence of care for Aboriginal people in prisons, specifically identified access to alcohol and other drug services as essential. Withdrawal and addiction are complex medical issues which can interact in even more complex ways without pre-existing medical conditions and disabilities. Without appropriate and specialist care, there is a high risk that these issues will be treated as non-serious or even as fair consequences for people who use drugs. This is a particularly pressing issue for VALS because Aboriginal people are more likely to have serious health conditions than other Australians, and because within the prison population, Aboriginal people have more health issues than non-Aboriginal people. I think in the interest of time, I might leave it there. All right. Thank you.